3 out of 4 Americans don't trust what an AI tells them, and 3 out of 4 Americans are using it anyway. And that contradiction, the gap between what we believe and what we do, is one of the most important data points in the entire intelligence era right now, because it's not a contradiction at all. It's a population telling you exactly what it needs. And what's striking about yesterday is that the first real answers started showing up on that particular point. Let's get into it. Microsoft did something yesterday that sounds like a product update, but it's actually a philosophical concession. They took GPT and Claude, two competing intelligence systems built by rival companies on different architectures with different training data, and wired them together. Not to race against each other, though, but to check each other's work. Now, this feature is called critique. One model plans research, pulls sources, writes a draft, and the other model reads the whole thing and marks it up, flagging factual errors, weak citations, missing angles. So there's a second mode called counsel that runs both of these models on the same task simultaneously. And then there's a third model that compares their outputs, and it identifies where they agree, where they disagree, and what each one caught and what the other missed. And here's the number. On the DRACO benchmark, 100 complex research tasks spanning medicine, law, and technology. The paired system scored 57.4. Claude Opus 4.6 alone does 42.7. So this is much more than just a marginal improvement. That's a 14-point gap. And the biggest gains came in exactly the places where a single AI system fails the most. Breadth of analysis and factual accuracy, the blind spots, the hallucinations part. So why does this matter for you? Because the most dangerous thing an AI system does isn't just to get a fact wrong, it's to get a fact wrong confidently. You ask it to research something and it hands you a polished report, and there's no one in the room to say, wait, that source doesn't say what you think it says. And that's the structural problem. A single system generating and grading its own homework has no mechanism for catching its own mistakes. What Microsoft built is essentially an editorial desk. One writer, one editor, different eyes, different biases. The same principle that's made journalism and science and law work for centuries. Adversarial review, except running at machine speed. And this didn't emerge in a vacuum either. The Century Report documented back on March 11th how Anthropic deployed agent teams on every pull request, and Amazon convened emergency meetings after AI-generated code caused production outages. In both those cases, the solution to AI reliability problems turned out to be more structured AI oversight and not less. Microsoft's version just made that principle a consumer product. The competitive implications are really worth sitting with for a bit. If multi-model composition reliably outperforms any single model, then the race to build the smartest AI becomes less important than the race to build the best coordination system. The orchestra conductor matters more than any individual musician, and that changes who wins, how, and what winning even means. Okay, let's shift away. Let me put that Microsoft story next to something that arrived on the same day and created a much bigger picture. Quinnipiac University polled nearly 1,400 American adults in late March. The results read like a country having two conversations at once in the same room with itself. 73% of Americans now use AI tools regularly. That's up from 67% a year ago. At the same time, though, 76% say they trust AI-generated information only rarely or sometimes. Only 6%, describe themselves as very excited about AI. 80% express concern. Here's the generational knife. Gen Z, the cohort born between 1997 and 2008, the most fluent users of these systems, is also the most pessimistic. 81% of them expect AI to reduce job opportunities. Across all age groups, 30% of employed Americans now fear their specific job will be made obsolete. And that was 21% a year ago. So that's a 9-point jump in 12 months. The researchers put it really cleanly. AI fluency and optimism are moving in opposite directions. It's not that people who've never touched AI are afraid of it. It's the people that use it the most are the most worried. Direct experience isn't producing reassurance. It's producing a sharper view of what's being displaced. And that's a fundamentally different dynamic than technophobia. That's informed anxiety. And the political consequence is already materializing. 2/3 of respondents said businesses aren't transparent enough about how they use AI. 2/3 also said that government regulation is inadequate. 65% don't want AI data centers built in their communities. These aren't philosophical positions. This is a population saying we see the power, we use the power, and we do not believe the people deploying it are acting in our interest. When 70% of a country expects fewer jobs and wants more oversight, governance responds, regardless of what any administration prefers. That's not speculation. It happened yesterday. California's governor signed an executive order requiring AI companies that want state contracts to demonstrate policies against CSAM distribution, harmful bias, and unlawful surveillance. The order also directs the states to develop best practices for watermarking AI-generated content, and it was explicitly framed as a response to the White House framework that called state regulation, quote, cumbersome. Over 100 state-level AI laws have already passed nationwide. The federal preference for light regulation is colliding with a public that by substantial majorities wants heavier oversight. And that collision is being resolved, and not through federal legislation, but through procurement standards, state laws, and the slow accumulation of public pressure. But here's where I want to really push past where most of the commentary stops. The trust deficit isn't a permanent condition. It's a feature of this moment. The gap between capability and accountability. Multimodal review systems that catch errors before you see them, that's trust infrastructure. Procurement standards that create consequences for AI behavior, that's trust infrastructure. Now the gap is real, but it is closing. And this isn't because anyone declared it closed, but because the systems being built, the editorial desks, the oversight layers, the state-level standards, are the mechanisms that have always produced trust in powerful institutions. They just haven't finished arriving yet. Distrust of new systems is always rampant right before we end up integrating it fully into our everyday lives. And AI is the fastest growing technology we've ever had, and of course we're going to feel this gap for the next little while. All right, I want to take you somewhere completely different. Chemistry lab at KAIST in South Korea, because what that team published in the Journal of American Chemical Society is one of those results that sounds somewhat modest until you understand what it actually eliminates. They built a catalyst system, silver-based metal catalyst paired with an organic photocatalyst that synthesizes amines. Amines are nitrogen-containing compounds used to produce antibiotics, cancer drugs, and other high-value pharmaceuticals, and the system runs on sunlight and atmospheric oxygen. That's it. No fossil fuels, no external chemicals, no energy input beyond what the sun provides for free. But the elegant part isn't the inputs, it's the loop. Conventional catalysts face a brutal trade-off. The ones that react fast are hard to reuse, and the ones that you can reuse are slow. The KAIST team designed a system where the waste products of the reaction automatically regenerate the catalyst. So the byproducts are the fuel for the next cycle, so it runs itself. Now, pharmaceutical manufacturing is a roughly $500 billion global industry. It runs on processes that require fossil fuel energy, generate toxic waste streams, and depend on continuous external chemical inputs. A catalyst that produces drug precursors from sunlight and air at industrial scale wouldn't just improve that system. It would replace its whole operating logic. Now, we're at proof of concept, not factory floor, and that distance is important. But the principle that you can run pharmaceutical-grade chemical synthesis on nothing but the ambient environment is now experimentally demonstrated. That door didn't exist before yesterday's publication, but now it's open, and people are going to walk through it. All right, shifting away. Batteries again. 4 days ago, the Century Report covered MG Motor announcing the first mass-produced EV with a semi-solid-state battery. Yesterday, the scope of that story detonated. CALB, one of China's major battery manufacturers, disclosed that its semi-solid-state cells have hit mass production for commercial trucks. 400 watt-hours per kilogram. That's powering Chery Automotive's light trucks, and simultaneously the same company's R46 cylindrical cells at 350 watt-hours per kilogram have entered mass production for eVTOL aircraft. XPeng's Aerote X3 flying car, trucks, and flying vehicles at the same time within months of the first passenger car. Let me make the speed of this really concrete. Battery chemistry usually migrates across vehicle categories in sequence. You prove it in a car, for example. Years later, it shows up in a truck, scaled up. More years, maybe aviation, scaled up again. What just happened is parallel deployment. The manufacturing pathways created for passenger EV generation carried the next generation directly into multiple sectors simultaneously. The infrastructure doesn't reset between applications anymore, it compounds. The 400 watt per kilogram density in the truck applications translates directly to longer range at lighter weight, which is the equation that determines whether an electric truck makes money. The 2C fast charging spec, 30 to 80% in just 15 minutes, and 20% improved cold weather range address two of the last practical objections that fleet operators have had. And CALB isn't stopping. A fully solid-state battery at 430 watts per kilogram has a production line completed since October. Semi-solid to fully solid. I think the question has stopped being whether advanced battery chemistry reaches commercial scale. It's now how many vehicle categories it reaches just within the next 12 months. We've got aviation, trucking, and passenger cars, and the manufacturing knowledge from each one feeds the next. Okay, a few quick hits from yesterday's releases. Ollama dropped version 0.19 powered by Apple's MLX framework. So this is roughly 1.6 times faster on your Apple Silicon for a local model inference. So if you run models on Mac, that's a significant jump for free. Alibaba's Qwen team released Qwen 3.5 Omni, a natively multimodal model handling text, image, audio, and video with speech output, supporting up to 256,000 tokens of context and 10 hours of audio input. And Meta open-sourced Boxcrete, which is an AI model for designing optimized concrete mixes, which sounds niche until you remember that concrete is the second most consumed substance on Earth after water, and its production accounts for roughly 8% of global CO2 emissions. So optimizing that recipe really matters at planetary scale. Now, here's what I'd like you to carry out the door today. Yesterday's stories share a quality that I think is really easy to miss. In every case, the answer to a hard problem turned out to be combination. Two AI models checking each other outperform either one alone. A catalyst pairs two components so that their waste feeds each other's work. A battery chemistry proven in cars immediately serves trucks and aircraft because the manufacturing knowledge compounds across these applications. Even the trust data, 76% distrust along 73% adoption, is a population combining direct experience with clear-eyed skepticism. And that combination is what produces governance pressure that actually changes things. So very soon, watch for whether multimodal coordination becomes the default architecture for enterprise AI deployment. Not which model, but which combination. And watch for the next battery chemistry to skip the sequential rollout entirely and debut across vehicle types on the same day. And watch for the next state to follow California's lead on procurement standards. The public is ahead of the institutions on this one. The institutions are starting to notice that. See you tomorrow.